There's a wonderful anecdote in Frank McCourt's autobiography, Teacher Man, in which he recounts how to deal with flying sandwiches. Recently qualified and working with an unruly class of lower secondary children in New York, one child throws a sandwich across the room and it lands splat on the floor. McCourt says, "Stop throwing sandwiches," to which one student instantly retorts, "There's no point saying that, sir. He's already thrown his sandwich." There's an agonizing moment when McCourt wonders what to do, and he walks very slowly across the room, picks up the sandwich and eats it. That moment wins him the amazement and the respect of the whole class. And McCourt says, wryly, "They don't teach you how to deal with flying sandwiches on teacher education courses." This incident made me laugh, and it also made me think how I wish someone had taught me how to deal with flying sandwiches when I first started out teaching children well over 25 years ago. My name is Carol Reed. I live and work in Madrid. I'm a teacher, as you can see from here. I'm also a teacher trainer and an educational consultant and a writer. And here are some of the recent titles that I've done for Macmillan. The reason I wanted to talk to you today about behaviour management is because I believe it's one of the most difficult things primary teachers face, and also one of the most important. If we get our behaviour management right, everything else falls into place, and whatever methodology or approach we're using, children will learn. But if our behaviour management goes awry, we're going to have a hard job, and very little learning is likely to take place. And we're also going to feel stressed out and exhausted too. There are no easy answers, many complex variables, and there's no guarantee that anything I can say today will help you to deal with flying sandwiches when they come your way. But what I would like to do is to share with you my philosophy and approach that I've developed over the years, as well as some practical tips which I hope will help you. First of all, I should say that I am very aware that all of us here are working in different cultural, educational contexts, where flying sandwiches may come in many different forms or may not even exist at all. I'm also aware that we're working with different class sizes, and that for some of us a class of 30 may seem to be a very big class, whereas for others it will be very small and unlikely to ever happen at all. Similarly, we all have different views of behaviour, and as David Fontana says in his book on the psychology of teachers, problem behaviour is a bit like beauty. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. And so for these reasons, what I'd like to ask you to do is to switch on your contextual filters and your personal filters, and to use these to take from the webinar what you can adapt and use in your own situation, and what you can relate to from your own beliefs and experience about teaching. And if you have a look at the bottom of your screen now, there's a chat box, and if you write your name and a question, we'll be looking at those and answering your questions towards the end of the webinar. I'd like to start with a little story, a cautionary tale from my own early days of teaching, which was a key learning moment that I'll never forget. Recently qualified, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as the saying goes, I was working with a class of 40 9- and 10-year-olds in a classroom where the desks were nailed to the floor. Full of the joys of communicative language teaching techniques, I set up an information gap activity which required the children to stand up and ask questions with others in their row. The activity started off well, the children seemed motivated, but it pretty soon dissolved into chaos. The more I asked the children to sit down, the more they moved about. The more I raised my voice, trying to get them to be quiet, the louder the noise became. The more agitated my body language became, the more boisterous the children became. I had fallen into the classic trap of allowing my behaviour to contribute to the problem rather than to solve it. From that experience, where I needed an SOS, I developed two personal maxims which have stood me in good stead ever since. The first one, softly, softly. When you're introducing unfamiliar techniques to children, proceed slowly and gradually, and always explain the reasons for doing things in terms that the children can understand. The next one, stay serene. Just as a teacher's raised and agitated voice tends to heighten the level of excitement and noise, a calm, strong, open, relaxed manner and quiet voice also finds reflection in the children's behaviour. Since that watershed moment, I've read a lot about behaviour management, and I've also had plenty of opportunities to practice my skills. And what follows now is based around 7 key points designed to give food for thought as well as practical tips. Remember, children are children. Stop behaving like a 6-year-old. But I am 6 years old. Although it may seem to be stating the obvious, we cannot expect children to have the same social skills of adults. We need to be prepared that children will always be testing the limits, and that it is natural, explorative, childish behaviour to do such things as fidget, drop pens on the floor, kick legs under the desk, run, not walk, make a noise, whisper to their friends, question what you have to say, and generally push the boundaries of behaviour to see how far they can go. How we deal with this on a daily basis makes the difference between surviving and thriving in our classrooms. The second point, control is a myth. It is a myth or an illusion to think that you control children's behaviour. You can't. There's only one person in the classroom whose behaviour you can control, and that's you. Understanding this simple fact and applying it to everything we do in the classroom has powerful and far-reaching implications. It starts with an awareness that if you want to change children's behaviour, you need to focus and control your own behaviour first. And through focusing on and controlling your own behaviour, you can, and through taking conscious personal choices about how you act at every moment of your teaching, you can positively influence the way children engage with their learning and they behave. As I see it, managing children in a positive way is what this means. Using a model of influence which emanates from you and everything you do in the classroom, rather than a model of control which is imposed from the outside or from above. So that rather than achieving external compliance through enforced control, we're influencing the children in a long-term way to develop internal self-control and to manage their learning in a responsible way. The next point, have a vision and a plan. As the Cheshire Cat said in Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. With behaviour management, it's vital to have a vision of how you would like your classroom to be and a roadmap of how you're going to get there in reality. It's strange in a way as we make lesson plans, unit plans, weekly plans, termly plans, sometimes even year plans, but often not behaviour management plans. And it doesn't just happen by itself. In order to make a behaviour plan, you may find it useful to consider the 7 R's. These are relationships, rules, routines, rights, responsibilities, respect, and rewards. For each R, you need to decide what you intend to establish as classroom norms and how you plan to go about it. Let's take routines and rules as examples. Routines are established ways of doing things which make children feel secure and also promote appropriate behaviour in the sense that everyone knows what they should be doing. In order to introduce and establish routines, you need to think of all the areas that these are going to cover and the forms that they will take. For example, you may like to think of routines for such things as greeting the children, getting into pairs and groups, getting the children's attention, starting and stopping activities, going to the toilet, tidying up, as well as others. Similarly, with rules, you will need to think of the behaviours you want to explicitly address. It's usually best to have as few rules as possible to make sure the reasons for them are clear, that they are enforceable, and what the consequences will be if they're not followed. Rules are most effective when they're expressed behaviourally and positively, using inclusive language, our rules for our classroom. And it can sometimes help to have rule headings, our communication rule, our safety rule, for example. An example of our communication rule could be: we put our hands up to speak, we use our quiet voices in pairs and groups, we ask if we need to speak Spanish, or whatever language it is. It's important that children feel ownership of the rules, for example, through making posters or displays of them, and getting the children to sign them as well. And usually from the age of about 9, the rules can be explicitly negotiated with the children, with a little bit of help and guidance from you. And it's sometimes useful to send a copy of our behaviour agreement home to parents too. Once you've thought of your vision and plan for the 7 R's, you need to make the most of your honeymoon. Your honeymoon is the first few weeks when you meet a class of children for the first time. It is critical for realising your vision and putting into practice your plan of how you want things to be. During this time, children are willing to like you, respect you, do things your way, although they will also be testing the limits of how far that they can go. This is the ideal moment for you to take the initiative and to establish a positive relationship and the working parameters of how you want and expect things to be in your lessons. It's also the moment to put into detailed practice your plan in relation to the 7 R's. To do this, it's also a good idea to remember the 5 F's, which I'm sure you can guess what they are. To be firm, friendly, fair, flexible, and fun. And as well as the 5 F's, you need the 3 P's, because you need to have lots of patience, perseverance, and persistence. Let's take an example of establishing a routine for getting the children's attention during the honeymoon period. You need to have decided what attention means for you. For example, whether it means listening, looking, ready to have eye contact with you, not just being quiet, but fiddling with a pen, looking in a bag, playing around with a friend, for example. You also need to decide on a clear signal you're going to use. This could be a tambourine, a little bell, it could be giving 3 claps, it could be standing in a special place in the classroom, and you also need to think of what you're going to say. The very first time you meet your children, you may find it helpful to explicitly teach them the signal. When I say or do this, it means this. And to even practice and rehearse it a few times. If you're using your voice, you need to give a clear signal, easily heard above the classroom noise. Ready to start now, everyone? Listen and look this way. Thanks. Okay. Good to start louder and then bring your voice down, which has a settling effect. And to use a confident, friendly, positive, but business-like tone. It helps to use statements rather than questions. Ready to start now, everyone, rather than, are you ready to start, to which the children might just answer no. And it also helps to use thanks, which conveys the expectation of immediate compliance, rather than please, which may sound weak and pleading. It's usually a good idea to stand in one place when you're waiting for attention, as this gives a focus for where the children are looking, and to use open, neutral, grounded body language. After you've given your signal, leave a tactical pause for children to process the instruction and give time to them respond. If you start repeating your signal over and over again, this may just lead to your being increasingly ignored. Insist on attention. Play the waiting game. The waiting game, you wait with neutral body language rather than tapping your feet and looking irritated as the children respond. As you're waiting, acknowledge appropriate behaviour and compliance. I can see Daniel looking this way, I can see Isabel's ready to listen, etc. And as you acknowledge this behaviour, you're actually paraphrasing your instruction, which is giving the cue to the students who are still not ready. The secret is, as far as possible, to focus on the behaviour you want rather than the behaviour you don't want, which leads you into being a nagging and negative kind of teacher. And also to insist on your routine. Don't settle for less than full attention, especially at first. Otherwise, you'll undermine your signal and what it means, and over time it will become harder to re-establish. Use the same kind of assistance in establishing your rules. For example, explain, demonstrate and rehearse what our quiet voices means. Point to a poster or display of rules and refer to them as often as necessary. Remember our rule 4? What's our rule 4? Use visual reminders, e.g. raise your hand for hands up, zip your mouth up for quiet, and also you can use additional fun things such as a noisometer as appropriate to help cue quieter behaviour during parent group work. And explain and also be ready to carry out whatever consequences you have decided, for example time out or staying back in break, if rules are repeatedly not followed. Over time, the good news is the best thing that happens, that what you initially establish as rules actually become routines. That is the normal part of your working parameters and the norms of how things are done in your classroom. Managing is reciprocal and interactive. As you work towards establishing the 7 R's and the way you want your classes to be, it's important to be aware that whatever techniques you use, classroom management is not something that is done to children. It is both reciprocal and interactive, and over time a complex web of interrelated behaviours are built up. There's a lot at stake for everyone in the classroom, for us as teachers, but also for the children, which at times we may tend to forget. From our point of view, the question may be, how do I manage with so many children with different interests, personalities, abilities, a less than ideal space, an unrealistic syllabus, high expectations from the parents and from the school? And from the child's point of view, there may be a similar parallel question. For example, how do I manage on my own in the classroom, having to do things that I may not want to do or can do very well, with the teacher judging me, my parents expecting me to do brilliantly, and wanting my friends to like me and include me and think I'm cool? In understanding classroom management processes, I think it can provide revealing insights to consider the dual meaning of the verb manage in English. On the one hand, to structure, organise and control, and on the other, to cope, to struggle to survive and maintain a sense of self. In order to manage in the classroom in either sense, both we as teachers and the children adopt different behavioural strategies, whether conscious or not, in order to survive. And the strategies that we adopt as teachers have a direct, reciprocal impact on those of the children. In order to create a happy, relaxed working atmosphere to maximise children's learning and allow everyone to thrive, we need to positively influence and respond to children's behaviour strategically. There are many complex reasons for children's behaviour, and as teachers, rather than educational psychologists, these are often hard for us to determine. At a simple level, though, children need and seek the attention of others, whether positive or negative. And the concept of strokes from Eric Burns' Games People Play is useful here. Strokes are the recognition, responsiveness and attention that one person gives another. If children lack positive strokes, they will tend to seek negative ones because that's better than being ignored. Children are constantly testing out, unconsciously of course, which strategies get them positive strokes and which strategies get them negative strokes. Children who get few positive strokes, whether at home or at school, can become addicted to seeking out the wrong sort of strokes. And this is not helped by the fact that we as teachers tend to give positive strokes or praise for work and effort and negative strokes for behaviour. Three things I'd like to mention which have helped me to respond to children's behaviour strategically and to keep the emotional temperature of the classroom on an even keel. These are, the first one, CBG, which simply stands for catch them being good. Give maximum attention to appropriate behaviour and minimum attention to inappropriate behaviour. This gives the message loud and clear that you value appropriate behaviour and not just work and effort. Look for what children are doing right rather than what they are doing wrong, and acknowledge this. The second thing is to always keep in mind where you want the focus of lessons to be. In other words, on your teaching and the children's learning rather than on behaviour issues, and try at all costs not to be sidetracked from this. Use the criteria of whether the behaviour is actually stopping you from teaching and children from learning in order to decide whether and how you'll intervene. And this is where the ABCD strategy that I've developed, I think, is helpful, where A refers to behaviour that is appropriate. All is on task. The children, if you like, are A for angelic. Everything is fine. B, behaviour is boring but bearable. Children are doing things which are not actually stopping your teaching or other children's learning. They're off task, but they're not disruptive. C is caution, handle with care. And D is disruptive or dangerous behaviour. It's best to follow a policy of minimal intervention where possible and aim to diffuse or avoid confrontation. For example, the incident of the flying sandwich was a C level of behaviour. But if McCourt had said to the child, "Pick up that sandwich at once," and the child had said no, it would have escalated to level D as a behaviour level. Similarly, if you take a child on directly about a B level of behaviour, for example, kicking legs annoyingly under a desk, or giving an exaggerated sigh when you ask them to do a piece of work, even though the behaviour is not actually stopping you from teaching or other children from learning, you risk escalating the level of behaviour to level C and risk a confrontation. The third thing, when you do need to intervene, which of course you will, it's best to do so one step at a time, from the least intrusive intervention to the most intrusive intervention. And to help you choose how you're going to do this at any moment, it's helpful, I think, to have thought through previously possible options that you have on a behaviour ladder. Just to give a few examples of these, the completely least intrusive would be tactical ignoring. You just decide that actually if I ignore this behaviour, the child will stop. Low down on the ladder will be non-verbal cueing. For example, a gesture for raising hands or being quiet. Eye contact. Eye contact is very powerful. Sue Cowley, in her book on management, talks about the art of the deadly stare. You can just look at a child and say with your eyes, "I don't like your behaviour," not note, "I don't like you, I don't like your behaviour, please stop now." And that, often combined with physical proximity, walking towards the child, will stop the behaviour. You can also point or refer to rules, for example, our noisometer. A little higher up the ladder, verbal cueing. For example, incidental direction. The bin is over there. In other words, put whatever it is in the bin. Or, for example, this is quiet time to finish our pictures. Embedded naming is a useful tactic as well. You see Pablo going off the boil at the back. Remember, Pablo says he likes apples, for example. Further up the ladder, what you want to do at all costs is not to get in an argument with a child. For example, a child is chewing gum in your class and says to you, "But Mr. So-and-so lets us chew gum in his class." Don't get drawn into an argument. Just say, "Maybe he does. In our class, you know the rule, the bin is over there." Another tactic further up the ladder, which is very helpful, is offering a directed choice. This allows a child to take responsibility for what they do and avoids any kind of humiliation or showdown. So, for example, a child has a forbidden item, for example, a mobile phone on their desk, so that rather than saying, put the mobile phone in your bag at once, the child might just say no, and then you have a confrontation on your hands. Offer the child a choice with neutral body language and calm voice. What would you like to do with your mobile phone? Would you like to turn it off and put it in your bag? Or would you like me to look after it till the end of the lesson? You can use this offering choice with a child who's not starting work. It's your choice. You can start now, or you can stay back in break to do your work. Higher up the ladder still, but it may be necessary to use some time, is blocking and refocusing. For example, you've asked the children to listen and look this way, and the children are saying, but it wasn't only us that were talking. You don't want to go in, you don't want to get into that, so you block it. Sorry guys, I'm not interested in the details of this. Listen and look this way now, please. Higher up still, command. And this is when something dangerous maybe is happening. Alex, get down from the windowsill at once. Okay? Start your voice a little louder, bring it down. Keep it deadly and determined with the expectation of immediate compliance. Near the top of the ladder, but this is also very cultural and depends on the context and the school, it may be appropriate to have cool-off time, time out within the classroom, where children actually are moved away from their peers for a short while. And if you do say that this is what's going to happen, the important thing is to carry it out, not to allow any kind of plea bargaining, and also to immediately restore the children when they come back to working with the class. Thanks for doing your time out. That's great. You're ready to work with the others now. Right at the top of the ladder, the very top of the ladder, an exit plan. This is a last resort for fighting dangerous behaviour, and it needs a whole school policy and an individualised plan to help children manage their behaviour. At the same time as responding to children's behaviour strategically, rather than asking yourself questions like, what's wrong with this child? Focusing on the problem and things you may not be able to do anything about, ask yourself questions like, what is this child's behaviour telling me? How can I change what I do to make things better, get a better rapport with the child, whatever it is? In other words, focusing on the solution and what you can do, and be ready to change or adjust your behaviour accordingly. Engage hearts and minds. This is the last and most important message to end with. Managing children's behaviour in a positive way is an integral rather than a separate part of everything we do in the classroom. And the way that we can have most influence and be most effective is through creating a positive class ethos and effective, supportive learning climate, building up rapport, trust, self-esteem, and engaging children in lively, interesting, varied, and suitably challenging lessons. Whatever methodology or approach we're using, we can do this by making the children feel valued, listening to what they have to say, modelling politeness and respect, emphasising care and cooperation, being consistent, reliable and fair in everything we say and do, using praise appropriately and providing constructive feedback and encouraging participation and effort, showing our own enthusiasm, it really is catching, using humour and a sense of fun, starting our lessons with impact. If children are bored after the first 3 minutes, how are they going to be behaving after 30? giving our lessons variety and pace, and being genuinely proud of what we and our children achieve together. So just to recap on the 7 points we've talked about, remember, children are children. Control is a myth. Have a vision and a plan. Make the most of your honeymoon. Managing is reciprocal and interactive. Respond to behaviour strategically. Engage hearts and minds. Oh yes, and by the way, good luck when the next flying sandwich or its equivalent comes your way.